Imagine waking up in a small, dimly lit hut, the cold seeping through the walls and floor. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke from the hearth. This is the reality for medieval peasants during the harsh winter months. Their homes, often constructed from wattle and daub, offered little protection against the biting cold. The thatched roofs leaked, and the floors were nothing more than compacted dirt, turning into a quagmire during wet conditions. Insulation was minimal, and privacy was a foreign concept. In these conditions, survival was a daily challenge. The hearth, central to the home, was both a source of warmth and a constant concern. Without a chimney, smoke filled the room, causing discomfort and health issues. Yet without the fire, the cold would be unbearable. Clothing provided little relief. Peasants wore layers of wool and rough-spun tunics, but these offered scant protection against the elements. At night, they huddled together, seeking warmth from each other's bodies and from the animals they shared their homes with. Food was scarce, and what they had was often bland and monotonous. Stews made from root vegetables and grains were common, providing little in the way of nutrition or variety. Hunger was a constant companion, and the threat of famine loomed large. Despite these hardships, medieval peasants developed ingenious methods to cope with the cold. They used hay and straw to insulate their homes and bodies, creating makeshift bedding and clothing. They learned to sleep in shifts, ensuring the fire never went out and that someone was always alert to the dangers of the night. Their resilience and resourcefulness were key to their survival. In a world where death was ever present, they found ways to endure, to adapt, and to live. The days were short and the nights were long. In winter, darkness descended by mid-afternoon, casting the villages into an eerie gloom. Peasants moved carefully through the muddy streets, aware that one misstep could lead to injury in the treacherous conditions. The uneven cobblestones were slick with ice, and the snow, when it fell, was as much a hindrance as it was a blessing, covering hidden dangers but also slowing every step. Villagers relied heavily on their animals, not just for food and labor, but also for warmth. Goats, sheep, and even pigs were brought inside the huts during the coldest nights. The animals were a living source of heat, their bodies radiating warmth that the families absorbed while sleeping. It was not a matter of luxury, but necessity. Children learned early to appreciate this shared warmth, and they adapted to sleeping in close quarters, a practice that shaped their very survival instincts. Water, usually sourced from wells or nearby streams, presented its own set of challenges. In freezing temperatures, these sources could turn to ice, forcing villagers to chip away at the surface or risk drinking dangerously cold water. Some wells froze completely, and the effort to access liquid water could be exhausting. Peasants developed techniques such as insulating buckets with straw or using heated stones to melt ice, displaying a resourcefulness born of necessity. Food preservation was another crucial survival skill. Meat, once scarce, had to be stored carefully. Salting, smoking, and drying were common methods. Grain was kept in large sacks, sometimes raised off the ground to avoid dampness and rodents. The winter diet was limited, often revolving around whatever root vegetables could be harvested late in the season, preserved grains, and occasionally preserved meat or fish. For many peasants, the scarcity of food was a constant anxiety, and the threat of famine was a shadow over every household. Hunting and foraging became vital skills. Forests and fields offered wild game, berries, and edible plants. Men often ventured into the woods for small game like rabbits or birds, using traps, nets, or bows. Women and children might gather nuts, roots, or herbs, learning to identify which plants were safe to eat. Knowledge passed down through generations became a lifeline, allowing families to supplement their meager rations. The social structure of the village itself also contributed to survival. Communities were close-knit, and neighbors relied on one another for support. Labor was often shared, with villagers assisting each other in gathering firewood, tending to animals, or preparing communal meals. When one family faced hardship, the collective effort of the village could mean the difference between life and death. This interdependence was not just practical, but essential, a social fabric woven tightly around the struggle for survival. Hygiene, by modern standards, was rudimentary. Baths were infrequent, and water for cleaning was scarce during winter. Clothes were washed only when necessary, and living quarters were crowded, often with dirt floors that never fully dried. These conditions contributed to illness, which could spread rapidly through the community. Despite these challenges, peasants developed coping strategies. Herbal remedies, poultices, and traditional knowledge of plants and their healing properties were employed to treat wounds and common ailments. Children played a unique role in the household economy. From an early age, they learned essential skills for survival: tending animals, fetching water, collecting firewood, and assisting in food preparation. Education was practical rather than academic, focusing on the skills necessary to endure the harsh realities of their environment. Yet, even amidst the toil, moments of play and imagination provided relief. Simple games, stories by the fire, and occasional celebrations created brief respites from the constant struggle. Winter festivals, though modest, were highlights of the year. They offered villagers a chance to gather, share food, and temporarily escape the monotony of survival. These celebrations were a mix of religious observance and cultural tradition, often centered around the cycles of the seasons. Singing, dancing, and communal feasting strengthened social bonds and reinforced the shared resilience of the community. Evening life revolved around the hearth. As darkness fell, villagers retreated indoors, huddling near the fire. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a sense of warmth and security in an otherwise unforgiving world. Stories were told, some cautionary, others humorous, but all carried lessons, passing knowledge from one generation to the next. In this intimate circle, the family's survival strategy was reinforced. The fire must never die, the food must last, and the community must remain strong. Sleep was another battle. Cold nights forced peasants to develop techniques to preserve body heat. Straw mattresses, layered clothing, and the warmth of animals were critical. Some families would rotate sleeping positions to ensure that everyone had a chance near the fire. The cold was relentless, and dreams were often disturbed by shivering and discomfort. Yet, human adaptability proved remarkable. Even the harshest nights were endured with ingenuity and resilience. Winter brought more than just cold. It brought danger in every corner. Roads became slippery and treacherous, making travel difficult. Traders and messengers struggled to deliver goods, and isolation became common as villages were cut off by snow. For peasants, this isolation reinforced the importance of self-sufficiency. Every family had to prepare in advance, storing firewood, preserving food, and ensuring animals were sheltered. Firewood was a lifeline. Without it, survival was impossible. Villagers spent weeks gathering, chopping, and stacking wood, often relying on nearby forests. The work was grueling and physically demanding, yet it was a shared labor that strengthened the bonds within the community. Wood had to be carefully rationed, as the fire needed to burn continuously, not just for warmth, but also for cooking and light. A single lapse in preparation could result in freezing nights or spoiled food. Hunting, already a critical skill, became even more essential during winter. Small game like rabbits, squirrels, and birds were pursued using traps or bows. Forests, while dangerous due to wild animals and hidden hazards under the snow, provided much-needed resources. Peasants often traveled in pairs or small groups to hunt safely, carrying crude weapons for protection. Tracking and knowledge of the land were vital. A wrong step could mean injury or death in the freezing wilderness. Fishing was another survival tactic. Ice-covered rivers and lakes posed challenges, but inventive methods were developed. Holes were cut into the ice, and simple hooks or nets were used to catch fish. The cold made the work difficult, but fish provided essential protein, especially when other food sources were scarce. Preservation techniques such as salting and smoking ensured the fish could last through the harsh months. Clothing, though rudimentary, was adapted to the environment. Peasants layered woolen garments and often wore multiple tunics to trap warmth. Hoods and cloaks protected against the wind and snow, while boots made from animal hides shielded the feet from frostbite. Sewing and mending were constant tasks, as clothing had to last through long, punishing winters. Mothers taught children how to repair garments, and resourcefulness became a family tradition. The mental toll of winter was significant. Darkness fell early, and the long nights were lonely and monotonous. The lack of light affected mood and energy, and the cold created constant stress. Communities relied on social interaction to maintain morale. Storytelling, singing, and simple games around the fire provided mental relief. Humor, even in small doses, became a survival mechanism, keeping spirits alive when the physical environment was unforgiving. Health was precarious. Frostbite, hypothermia, and respiratory illnesses were common threats. The combination of poor sanitation, crowded living conditions, and scarce nutrition left peasants vulnerable. Herbal remedies and home treatments were vital. Plants like chamomile, sage, and thyme were used to treat wounds, ease fevers, or soothe digestive issues. Knowledge of these remedies was passed down through generations, often orally, forming an essential part of the peasant's survival toolkit. The family structure reinforced survival strategies. Each member had roles and responsibilities, from fetching water and gathering firewood to preparing meals and tending animals. Children learned practical skills from a young age, contributing to household labor while absorbing knowledge that would ensure their own survival as adults. Fathers, mothers, and older siblings shared the burdens of work, and mutual dependence was not just cultural, but a matter of life and death. Even religious practices played a role in coping with winter. Churches and small chapels became centers of community support, offering comfort, advice, and occasional assistance. Religious festivals were often intertwined with seasonal cycles, marking key points in the agricultural calendar. While resources were scarce, communal gatherings reinforced a sense of unity and purpose, helping people endure hardships with faith and collective resilience. The diet, always a concern, became even more limited in winter. Grains, root vegetables, and preserved foods dominated meals. Soups and stews were central, often simmered over the fire for hours to extract maximum nourishment from meager ingredients. Dairy products, when available, were prized for their protein and fat content. Meat, usually from preserved sources, was consumed sparingly. Peasants relied on ingenuity and experience to stretch every morsel, and waste was minimized. The construction and maintenance of homes reflected adaptation to harsh conditions. Insulation with straw and mud was common, and small low windows minimized heat loss. Roofs required regular maintenance, especially after snow or rain. Floors, often dirt or stone, were layered with straw to improve warmth and comfort. Families learned to optimize every element of their homes for maximum survival benefit. Even small innovations like hanging blankets over doorways or using stones to retain heat made a difference. Winter also demanded vigilance. Predators, both wild animals and human thieves, were more active when resources were scarce. Livestock had to be guarded, and valuables were hidden or closely watched. Villages established informal patrols or relied on neighbors for protection. The risk of fire was another concern, as a single accident could destroy the home and all supplies. Every action, no matter how mundane, was tied to survival, and caution became second nature. Nighttime rituals often involved preparation for the cold hours ahead. Peasants arranged bedding near the hearth, ensured firewood was ready, and checked that animals were secure. The small comforts of life, a warm blanket, a cup of broth, a shared story, became deeply cherished. These moments of care and planning allowed families to endure what might otherwise have been unbearable, creating routines that balanced practicality with emotional reassurance. Even in adversity, creativity thrived. Folk songs, simple instruments, and storytelling kept culture alive. Crafts like weaving, embroidery, and carving were both practical and expressive, turning necessary work into art. These activities provided distraction, skill building, and a sense of continuity in a world where survival was uncertain. Through creativity, peasants found meaning and maintained a connection to the world beyond mere subsistence. The winter months brought with them not just physical hardship, but also a heightened awareness of mortality. Disease and injury were constant threats, and medical knowledge was rudimentary at best. A simple fever could turn deadly, and complications from frostbite or infection were common. Midwives, herbalists, and local healers played crucial roles in the community, often using age-old remedies passed down through generations. Knowledge of plants, poultices, and basic surgical techniques became indispensable survival tools. The role of animals extended beyond warmth and food. Horses, oxen, and other draft animals were vital for transporting wood, water, and supplies, especially when roads were blocked with snow. Livestock had to be carefully managed to prevent starvation or illness. Peasants rotated grazing areas, stored hay, and monitored the health of their animals, understanding that the survival of their families depended on the survival of their beasts. Children's daily routines adapted to the season. When fields were frozen, work shifted indoors. Boys learned to repair tools, maintain firewood stores, and assist in food preparation. Girls helped with cooking, mending clothing, and caring for younger siblings. Education was hands-on and practical, with storytelling and song woven into the teaching of survival skills. Through repetition, children internalized essential knowledge, preparing them to carry on the family's legacy of resilience. The psychology of survival was complex. Fear, anxiety, and uncertainty were constant companions, yet humans adapted remarkably. Community rituals, from shared meals to small celebrations of minor victories, helped to reinforce a sense of control over an otherwise unpredictable world. Humor, storytelling, and superstition offered comfort, turning the intangible threat of winter into a manageable challenge. Even the smallest victories, a well-stacked pile of firewood or a successfully trapped rabbit, provided immense psychological relief. Religion and superstition intertwined with survival. Peasants often invoked saints, charms, or prayers to protect their homes and livestock. Certain days were considered auspicious for planting or hunting, and rituals were observed to ward off illness or misfortune. While these practices may seem quaint today in the harsh reality of medieval life, they offered structure, hope, and a shared sense of purpose that reinforced communal bonds. The work of women in winter was relentless. Cooking over smoky fires, caring for children, maintaining clothing, and tending to animals left little time for rest. Yet their labor was central to the survival of the household. Women's knowledge of herbs, food preservation, and domestic medicine was invaluable, and their ability to organize and prioritize tasks kept families alive through the harshest months. Weather dictated almost every aspect of life. Sudden snowstorms could trap villagers indoors for days, while icy rains created treacherous conditions outside. Wind and frost penetrated even the thickest walls, and nightfall brought a darkness that was both physical and psychological. Peasants learned to anticipate changes in weather, reading the sky, observing animal behavior, and listening to local folklore that often contained kernels of practical advice. Even simple pleasures took on extraordinary importance. A warm cup of broth, a shared story by the fire, or a brief moment of laughter became treasured experiences. These small comforts offered a mental reprieve and strengthened the bonds between family members. In a world where every day was a struggle, these moments were reminders of humanity's capacity for resilience, creativity, and connection. Trade and barter were limited in winter, but remained essential. Villages stored surplus food and goods to exchange with neighboring settlements. When travel was possible, peasants traded grain, wool, or preserved meat for items they could not produce themselves. These exchanges strengthened inter-village connections and provided access to goods that supported survival, from essential tools to medicinal herbs. The architecture of survival extended beyond homes to communal structures. Granaries, barns, and storage sheds were carefully constructed to protect food and livestock from the elements. Villagers collaborated on these projects, understanding that the community's safety depended on shared responsibility. Even small innovations, like elevated storage or double-layered walls, demonstrated the ingenuity required to endure the unforgiving winters. Social hierarchies influenced access to resources. While lords and wealthier villagers enjoyed relative comfort, peasants often had to make do with what they could produce or scavenge. Nonetheless, survival often depended on cooperation rather than competition. Sharing firewood, lending tools, or providing food to neighbors in dire need reinforced a system of mutual support that transcended social rank. Seasonal cycles dictated the rhythm of life. Winter was a period of intense survival, but it was also a time for reflection, preparation, and education. Families planned for spring planting, repaired tools, and taught children essential skills. The repetitive cycle of seasons created a structure that guided life, instilling patience, discipline, and an appreciation for the subtle rhythms of nature. Light, or the lack of it, played a significant role in daily life. Candles, tallow lamps, and the hearth provided the only illumination during long nights. The flickering glow-shaped activities, limiting what could be done and providing a natural schedule for work and rest. Shadows danced on the walls, creating a sense of movement and life in otherwise dim and static surroundings. Isolation, while challenging, also fostered creativity and adaptability. With limited distractions and external resources, peasants became skilled problem solvers. Tools were repurposed, clothing was repaired rather than replaced, and food was stretched to its limits. Ingenuity was a constant requirement, and families developed a culture of improvisation that ensured survival in even the harshest conditions. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening. Cuts, bruises, or burns risked infection, particularly in winter, when access to clean water was limited. Knowledge of herbs, poultices, and basic care was essential. Mothers and grandmothers served as primary caregivers, passing down practical medical knowledge to ensure that children and adults alike could recover from accidents that might otherwise be fatal. The cold, relentless, and unyielding shaped the very rhythm of daily life. Even simple activities such as fetching water, tending livestock, or chopping firewood became monumental tasks when frost covered every surface. Peasants developed strategies to cope with these harsh conditions. Tasks were prioritized based on urgency and danger, fetching water in daylight to avoid slipping, tending the fire continuously to prevent freezing, and managing food stores carefully to ensure nothing was wasted. The layout of the peasant home reflected these strategies. Most huts had a single multi-purpose room where cooking, sleeping, and work occurred together. The hearth was positioned centrally, serving as the source of heat and light. Families arranged their sleeping areas close to the fire, often layering straw, blankets, and even animal hides to conserve warmth. Space was shared with animals, a practice both practical and necessary, as their body heat contributed significantly to human survival. Hunger shaped both behavior and resourcefulness. Peasants learned to extend the life of every food item. Bread, often coarse and dense, was rationed carefully. Leftover grains were boiled into porridge or added to stews. Root vegetables stored in cool, dark cellars were inspected regularly to prevent rot, while dried or smoked meats were sliced thinly to make small portions last. These habits of careful consumption were instilled from childhood, teaching children the importance of foresight and planning. Winter work often required improvisation. Tools could freeze or become unusable, and roads were blocked by snow or mud. Peasants adapted by creating simple devices to aid in their labor. Wooden sleds to transport heavy loads, makeshift ice scrapers for frozen wells, and straw insulation to protect both tools and supplies. These small innovations were critical, reflecting an intimate understanding of the environment and a capacity for creative problem-solving that was necessary for survival. The psychological effects of long, harsh winters were profound. The extended darkness could lead to feelings of isolation and despair. Communities countered this through rituals, shared work, and storytelling. Tales of past hardships, heroic deeds, and clever solutions provided both entertainment and instruction. They reinforced community identity and offered lessons in resilience, ensuring that knowledge was passed down and that morale remained intact despite the oppressive conditions. Religious observances provided structure and hope. The church calendar dictated the rhythm of life, and holy days often coincided with key agricultural or seasonal milestones. Even in winter, peasants observed rituals to protect their homes, ensure successful planting, and safeguard their livestock. Prayer, candle lighting, and small offerings were integrated into daily life, reinforcing a sense of order and spiritual resilience amid uncertainty. Social cohesion was essential. Neighbors relied on each other for assistance, particularly when extreme weather made tasks dangerous. Working in groups, sharing firewood, and helping tend livestock or repair homes strengthened communal bonds. The survival of the individual was inextricably linked to the well-being of the village as a whole. Mutual support was not just a moral obligation, it was a practical necessity that ensured the continuity of life through the most trying seasons. Clothing, while basic, was critical for enduring winter. Layers of wool, linen, and animal hides were common, and garments were repaired frequently. Sewing was a valued skill, especially for women, who maintained the clothing that kept families alive. Hats, gloves, and hoods protected extremities from frostbite, while thick boots made of leather or felt insulated the feet. Every item had a practical function, and there was little room for excess or decoration. Survival dictated simplicity. Food scarcity during winter forced peasants to supplement their diets creatively. Foraging became an essential skill. Edible roots, nuts, and berries hidden in forests or along riverbanks provided vital nutrients. Knowledge of which plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous was passed down orally and reinforced through practice. Hunting supplemented the diet with protein, and preserved meat, fish, and dairy ensured that the family could survive until spring. The home itself required constant vigilance. Thatched roofs needed repair after heavy snow or storms, and walls had to be maintained to prevent drafts. Small cracks could allow cold to penetrate, making living spaces unbearable. Floors, often layered with straw, required regular maintenance, and bedding had to be refreshed to prevent dampness and rot. The daily work of maintenance, though tedious, was critical to the survival of the family. Children's education was practical. They learned by observing and participating in daily tasks. Boys mastered hunting, woodcutting, and tool repair, while girls learned cooking, sewing, and animal care. The lessons were hands-on and rigorous, ensuring that by the time children reached adulthood, they were fully equipped to maintain household survival. Stories, proverbs, and songs reinforced these lessons, embedding essential knowledge in memory through repetition and oral tradition. The mental strategies developed to endure winter were as important as physical skills. Patience, attention to detail, and foresight were crucial. Families planned weeks in advance, anticipating snowstorms, shortages, and illness. Small rituals, arranging firewood, checking stored food, or setting aside water supplies, provided a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. These routines offered comfort and structure, reducing anxiety and promoting a collective sense of preparedness. Community celebrations, even during winter, played a vital role. Festivals provided a brief respite from daily hardships, offering opportunities for socialization, music, dance, and shared meals. These events reinforced bonds and lifted morale, reminding villagers that despite adversity, life continued, and the cycle of seasons would eventually bring renewal. Work did not stop even when illness struck. Peasants developed methods to continue necessary tasks despite physical weakness. Family members took turns caring for the sick, tending animals, and maintaining the fire. Herbal remedies, poultices, and supportive care were critical, but resilience and shared responsibility often determined whether a family could survive prolonged illness. Isolation, imposed by snow or ice, fostered a culture of self-reliance. Every household became a microcosm of survival skills. Cooking, heating, repairing, and caregiving all had to be managed internally, with minimal outside assistance. This isolation encouraged creativity, resourcefulness, and a deep understanding of the environment, as families adapted to the challenges presented by winter. Even simple leisure activities had survival value. Storytelling, music, and games strengthened mental resilience, provided instruction, and reinforced community identity. Humor and imagination became essential tools for enduring long nights and harsh conditions. Moments of joy, however fleeting, were celebrated and remembered, creating memories that sustained morale through the bleakest periods. Winter demanded vigilance in every aspect of life. Fires had to be constantly tended, as a lapse could result in freezing conditions overnight. Cooking required attention, as meals needed to be prepared efficiently with minimal fuel. Storage of food and water was equally important. Spoilage or contamination could be disastrous. Every action was connected to survival, and routines were meticulously followed to minimize risk. The relationship with the land was intimate and utilitarian. Villagers understood which areas provided the best firewood, which fields yielded the hardiest vegetables, and where wild game could be found even under snow. Observation of the natural world informed daily decisions. Weather patterns, animal behavior, and seasonal changes guided activity. Knowledge accumulated over generations became a crucial survival toolkit, a mix of empirical wisdom and practical intuition. Peasants relied heavily on craftsmanship and tool-making. Axes, saws, and simple plows had to be maintained and repaired continually. Broken tools could halt essential tasks, so ingenuity was critical. Spare parts were scarce, and resourcefulness ensured that tools lasted as long as possible. Families learned to improvise, repurposing broken items into new solutions. These skills were practical, but they also fostered a culture of creativity and problem-solving vital for enduring winter. The harsh environment shaped social interactions. Cooperation became essential, and villages functioned as tightly knit networks of mutual assistance. Neighbors helped each other chop wood, fetch water, and care for sick or injured members. Sharing resources was a practical necessity, not merely an act of generosity. Social cohesion increased resilience, allowing communities to withstand challenges that would overwhelm isolated households. Nighttime routines were highly structured. Families gathered around the hearth, huddled together for warmth, and shared simple meals. The fire provided light, warmth, and a focal point for social interaction. Storytelling was common, blending entertainment with education. Tales of cunning hunters, heroic ancestors, and natural phenomena conveyed essential survival lessons, passing knowledge from one generation to the next in an engaging and memorable way. Health and hygiene remained precarious. The cold and damp conditions encouraged illness, and medical knowledge was limited. Herbal remedies were critical, as were practices to maintain cleanliness despite scarce water. Boiling water, washing hands when possible, and tending wounds with care helped prevent infection. Families relied on the collective knowledge of the village, pooling experience to treat illness and injury. Animals were both a lifeline and a responsibility. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but they also required constant care. Shelters had to be maintained, hay and fodder stored, and animals monitored for signs of illness. Loss of livestock could be catastrophic, so attention to detail and preventive care were critical. In many households, survival depended as much on animals as on human labor. Children absorbed these lessons through participation and observation. Tasks were divided by age and ability, ensuring that children contributed meaningfully while gaining essential skills. Boys practiced hunting, woodworking, and tool maintenance. Girls focused on cooking, sewing, and domestic care. Education was pragmatic and immersive, ensuring that by adolescence, children were capable of contributing fully to household survival. Food scarcity and rationing taught strategic thinking. Peasants calculated portions carefully, ensuring that essential calories lasted through long stretches of winter. Preservation techniques, smoking, salting, drying, were applied judiciously. Nothing was wasted, and even scraps could be repurposed into broth or animal feed. The discipline of rationing required foresight, patience, and an understanding of nutritional priorities. Winter also tested mental resilience. Long nights and limited activity created the risk of boredom and despair. Villagers countered this with structured routines, games, songs, and storytelling. Humor, even in small doses, provided relief from monotony. The capacity to find joy in minor victories, a trapped rabbit, a successful meal, or a repaired roof, reinforced morale and encouraged perseverance. Trade, though limited, remained important. Villages occasionally exchanged surplus goods with neighbors. Grains, preserved meats, or wool could be traded for tools, spices, or rare items. These interactions reinforced social networks and provided access to resources unavailable within the village. Even limited trade had profound effects, enabling families to survive shortages and maintain essential skills and tools. Clothing required constant attention. Wool garments had to be mended, layered, and dried carefully. Extremities were protected against frostbite with additional layers, and shoes or boots were repaired frequently to prevent injury. Clothing was functional, and fashion played no role. Survival dictated utility and durability. Skill in sewing and repair was as valuable as skill in hunting or farming. The architecture of homes reflected adaptation and resilience. Thatched roofs required reinforcement after storms, and walls needed continual maintenance to block drafts. Floors were layered with straw for insulation, and beds were arranged to maximize warmth. Even small improvements, such as hanging curtains or covering doorways with blankets, increased comfort and survival odds. Families optimized every aspect of their environment for efficiency and protection. Knowledge of nature was indispensable. Peasants observed animal behavior, tracked weather patterns, and interpreted natural signs to anticipate challenges. Sudden snowstorms, ice, or thawing periods could disrupt survival plans. Experienced villagers could predict changes, allowing the community to act in advance, safeguarding food, water, and shelter. This intimate understanding of the environment was a form of practical science developed through experience. Isolation prompted ingenuity. With limited external resources, households developed self-sufficiency. Cooking, heating, repairing, and caring for family members all had to be managed internally. Creativity and adaptability became second nature, from fashioning tools to improvising shelters or repurposing materials. Every challenge demanded inventive solutions, and failure often had severe consequences. Even leisure had survival value. Storytelling, music, and play strengthened mental resilience, reinforced community identity, and maintained morale. Small celebrations, victories in hunting, repair, or successful meals became cherished events. Moments of joy and communal connection provided psychological sustenance that complemented the physical necessities of survival. Superstition and ritual remained intertwined with daily life. Protective charms, prayers, and observances were believed to ward off illness, danger, or misfortune. Whether or not effective by modern standards, these practices gave villagers a sense of control over an unpredictable world. Rituals also reinforced social cohesion, uniting communities in shared belief and purpose. Even small emergencies demanded immediate response. Fires, injuries, or sudden illness could threaten survival. Families relied on collective knowledge, improvisation, and experience to manage crises. Quick thinking, coordinated action, and practical skill often determined whether a family endured a setback or succumbed to its effects. Preparation and vigilance were constant companions. The environment shaped cultural expression. Songs, stories, and crafts reflected the struggles and ingenuity of peasant life. Folk songs celebrated clever hunters, resilient families, and the changing seasons. Handcrafted tools, clothing, and household items were both functional and artistic, reflecting creativity and resourcefulness. Culture and survival were inseparable, each reinforcing the other. Winter was not just a season, it was a crucible that tested every aspect of life. The relentless cold-shaped routines dictated priorities and demanded constant vigilance. Peasants adapted by creating structured daily schedules, balancing labor, care for animals, food preparation, and fire maintenance. Each day required careful planning, and even minor oversights could have serious consequences. The hearth remained the center of domestic life. Beyond providing warmth, it was essential for cooking, drying clothes, and sometimes even bathing. Fires had to be maintained around the clock, often requiring a rotation of family members to ensure that the flame never went out. The loss of a fire could mean hypothermia, spoiled food, or the inability to cook, highlighting the hearth's central role in survival. Food scarcity drove ingenuity. Peasants supplemented their diet through foraging, hunting, and careful management of stored provisions. Root vegetables and preserved grains formed the backbone of winter meals, while small game and preserved meat provided essential protein. Stews and porridges were common, simmered for hours to extract maximum nutrition. Families learned to ration wisely, balancing immediate needs with long-term survival. Water was another daily challenge. Wells could freeze, and streams were often covered with ice. Villagers developed methods to access liquid water, using heated stones or insulating containers. Ice-breaking was laborious, but essential. Water collection became a communal activity, with neighbors assisting each other, reflecting both necessity and cooperation. Children played a vital role in household labor. They fetched water, tended animals, and helped gather firewood. In doing so, they learned practical survival skills through direct experience. Boys were trained in hunting and tool repair, while girls learned cooking, sewing, and domestic care. Education was entirely practical, focusing on skills necessary for survival, and these lessons were passed down seamlessly from generation to generation. Animals were both companions and resources. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs provided milk, meat, warmth, and labor. Livestock shelters had to be maintained, and food stores monitored carefully to prevent starvation. Animals required constant attention, and neglect could have severe consequences for human survival. Families relied on intuition and observation to monitor their health, sometimes noticing subtle signs of illness before it became critical. The psychological burden of winter was significant. Darkness, isolation, and monotony could sap morale, yet villagers found ways to maintain mental resilience. Storytelling, music, and communal gatherings offered distraction and comfort. Humor, even in small doses, helped counter the stress of long, harsh nights. The ability to endure mentally was as critical as physical endurance. Clothing was a critical aspect of winter survival. Wool layers, animal hides, and felted boots insulated the body against frost. Hats, gloves, and hoods protected extremities, while multiple tunics trapped warmth. Clothing maintenance was constant. Tears or holes could be fatal in sub-zero temperatures. Sewing, mending, and improvising garments were essential skills, and mastery of these tasks was a mark of competence within the household. Housing required constant attention. Thatched roofs needed reinforcement, walls required repair, and floors had to be insulated with straw or other materials. Even minor structural failures could result in heat loss and increased risk of illness. Homes were carefully arranged to conserve warmth, with sleeping areas positioned near the hearth and communal space optimized for both work and rest. Superstition and ritual influenced behavior. Protective charms, prayers, and observances were common, believed to ward off illness, misfortune, or spiritual harm. Rituals were deeply intertwined with practical survival strategies, reinforcing community cohesion and providing a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. Trade and barter persisted, even in winter. Villages exchanged surplus grains, preserved foods, wool, or tools for items they could not produce themselves. These interactions were critical for maintaining access to essential goods, such as metal tools, medicinal herbs, or rare spices. Trade networks also reinforced social ties between villages, creating a broader community that could provide support in times of need. Health and hygiene remained challenging. The combination of cold, dampness, and limited water increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were vital. Plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow were used to treat wounds, fevers, and digestive issues. Knowledge of these remedies was preserved orally, ensuring that essential care could be provided even when professional medical assistance was unavailable. Food preservation was an ongoing priority. Meats were salted, smoked, or dried to last through the season. Grains and root vegetables were stored in cool, dry conditions, often elevated from the ground to prevent moisture and rodent damage. Families monitored supplies carefully, rotating stocks to ensure freshness. Preservation techniques were critical to prevent starvation during long, harsh winters. Hunting and foraging were both vital and dangerous. Wolves, foxes, and other predators roamed forests, posing threats to both humans and livestock. Peasants learned to navigate forests safely, track game, and avoid hazards under snow and ice. Hunting required patience, skill, and sometimes ingenuity, with traps, nets, and bows adapted to the environment. Foraging for edible plants required precise knowledge, as mistakes could be fatal. Community support reinforced survival. Villagers worked together to chop firewood, repair roofs, and care for animals. Emergencies, whether fire, injury, or illness, were addressed collectively. Knowledge, labor, and resources were shared, ensuring that no household faced extreme hardship alone. Mutual dependence was practical, moral, and essential for enduring the winter months. The mental and emotional resilience developed during these months left a lasting mark. Peasants learned patience, foresight, and the ability to adapt to constantly changing conditions. Children absorbed lessons not only in practical skills, but also in coping strategies, humor, and communal responsibility. The hardships of winter fostered a culture of endurance, creativity, and interdependence that shaped both individuals and communities. Even small achievements were celebrated. Successfully trapping game, repairing essential tools, or preserving a full stock of food provided a sense of accomplishment. These minor victories were psychologically significant, offering hope and reinforcing strategies for survival. Celebrating small successes created motivation and a sense of purpose in an otherwise relentless environment. As winter deepened, the importance of foresight became even clearer. Families carefully monitored their supplies, calculating how much food, firewood, and water would be needed to last until spring. Every action had consequences, and misjudgment could be fatal. Mothers and fathers taught children to anticipate needs, plan their work, and make every resource stretch as far as possible. This foresight was not theoretical. It was survival. The rhythm of life was dictated by daylight. Long nights limited work, while short, cold days required efficiency. Peasants structured their labor carefully, combining essential chores with education for the young. Light was a precious commodity, and families used every available hour wisely. Candles and tallow lamps were expensive and limited, so their use was reserved for crucial tasks. Darkness forced ingenuity, whether in arranging sleeping spaces, maintaining the fire, or preparing meals ahead of time. Livestock care became a central daily activity. Animals were not just sources of food or labor, they were lifelines. Cattle, goats, and sheep provided milk, wool, and warmth. Horses and oxen were indispensable for transport, plowing, and hauling firewood. Each animal required attention, feeding, sheltering, and monitoring for signs of illness. Families relied on both observation and experience, learning to recognize subtle indicators of disease or stress. Losing livestock could imperil an entire household, making vigilance constant. Hunting and foraging required skill, patience, and caution. Forests offered both sustenance and danger. Wolves and foxes threatened livestock, while icy terrain increased the risk of injury. Peasants set traps, crafted weapons, and traveled in pairs to minimize risk. Foraging required knowledge of plants, roots, and berries, identifying which were safe, which could be stored, and which had medicinal properties. Children learned these lessons alongside their elders, absorbing practical survival knowledge essential for adulthood. The physical toll of winter was severe. Cold sapped energy, frozen hands and feet risked frostbite, and long hours of labor drained strength. Every task required careful pacing, layering of clothing, and protection against the elements. Even simple chores demanded heightened awareness and effort. Survival depended not just on labor, but on careful attention to the body and environment. Food scarcity demanded creativity. Peasants repurposed scraps, combined limited ingredients, and relied on preserved foods to last through the months. Stews, porridges, and baked root vegetables formed the staple diet. Meals were planned strategically, balancing immediate needs with the need to maintain reserves. Families developed rituals around food preparation and consumption, emphasizing efficiency, conservation, and community sharing. The hearth remained central to life. Its warmth was vital, but so too was the constant maintenance of the fire. Fuel had to be rationed, logs stacked and dried, and embers monitored. The hearth provided light, warmth, and a space for cooking, sewing, and socializing. Its importance extended beyond survival. It was the emotional and cultural heart of the home, a symbol of continuity and life amidst the harshest conditions. Clothing required constant attention. Layers were mended, patched, and sometimes repurposed to maintain insulation. Shoes, boots, and gloves were critical, as frostbite could be deadly. Sewing skills were essential, and children learned to repair and maintain garments from a young age. The durability and effectiveness of clothing often determined the difference between discomfort and illness, making it a vital aspect of daily life. Community cohesion was essential. Villages functioned as networks of mutual support. Chopping firewood, tending communal livestock, repairing shared infrastructure, and helping during emergencies fostered interdependence. Families relied on neighbors not out of choice, but necessity. The collective strength of the community could mitigate the harshness of winter, providing both practical aid and emotional support. Mental resilience was cultivated through routine, ritual, and creativity. Storytelling, songs, and communal games offered diversion and instruction. Tales often included lessons in survival, wit, and clever problem-solving, transmitting knowledge in memorable ways. Humor and shared experiences reinforced social bonds and provided psychological sustenance that complemented physical survival strategies. Even small achievements were celebrated. A successfully trapped hare, repaired roof, or preserved stockpile of food was cause for pride. These minor victories reinforced confidence and encouraged continued effort, offering psychological reinforcement in an environment that constantly tested endurance. Religious practices intertwined with daily survival. Observance of saints' days, prayers, and protective rituals gave structure to life and a sense of hope. Whether these practices had tangible effects or not, they reinforced community cohesion, transmitted cultural values, and provided psychological comfort amidst uncertainty. Rituals were integrated into practical survival, often aligning with seasonal cycles and agricultural necessities. Health and hygiene remained a constant concern. Limited water, shared living spaces, and cold conditions increased the risk of illness. Herbal remedies, poultices, and preventive care were critical. Families relied on collective knowledge to treat injuries, fevers, and infections. The skills of mothers, midwives, and local healers were indispensable, and their knowledge ensured that minor ailments did not become fatal. Trade and bartering, though restricted by winter, maintained essential connections. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool could be exchanged for tools, spices, or medicinal herbs. These interactions strengthened ties between villages and provided access to scarce resources. Even minimal trade had profound implications, supporting survival and maintaining skill and tool availability. Hunting, gathering, and foraging were both vital and perilous. Ice, snow, and predators made excursions dangerous. Knowledge of terrain, animal behavior, and seasonal patterns was crucial. Families planned trips carefully, often sending experienced members to gather food while minimizing risk. These excursions reinforced both skill and resilience, embedding survival instincts into daily life. The cumulative effect of winter created a culture of endurance. Peasants developed skills, routines, and knowledge that allowed them to thrive despite the harsh environment. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental resilience, and community support became intertwined, forming a comprehensive survival system. Every action, from tending a fire to repairing a roof, contributed to the delicate balance of life during the cold months. Winter demanded constant attention to firewood. Trees had to be felled, chopped, and stacked before the snow made travel difficult. Dry wood was essential. Damp logs produced smoke and inefficient heat. Families worked together to gather and store sufficient supplies, understanding that even a single miscalculation could result in freezing nights. Children assisted where possible, learning early the labor and planning required for survival. Food preservation was an ongoing priority. Salted or smoked meats had to be rotated to prevent spoilage. Root vegetables were stored in cool, dry areas, often layered with straw or sand. Grains were inspected regularly for moisture or pests. Cooking required careful rationing, ensuring that every meal provided enough sustenance while conserving supplies. Every family developed strategies that balanced immediate consumption with long-term survival. Animals were central to winter life. Livestock provided milk, meat, wool, and labor, but they also required careful management. Feed had to be rationed, shelters reinforced, and health monitored. Horses and oxen were essential for transporting wood and goods. Neglecting animals could imperil human survival, making their care a top priority in daily routines. Daily routines revolved around efficiency and practicality. Work was scheduled according to daylight, weather, and necessity. Water had to be fetched, fires maintained, food prepared, and livestock tended. Every activity was connected to survival, and families learned to optimize their time. Skills such as tool repair, clothing mending, and fire maintenance became as essential as hunting or cooking. Clothing required constant attention. Woolen layers were patched and repaired to prevent drafts. Hats, gloves, and hoods protected extremities, while boots were maintained to avoid frostbite. Knowledge of sewing and repair was critical, and children learned these skills alongside their daily chores. Functional clothing was not optional. It was a lifeline. Hunting and foraging were crucial but hazardous. Wolves, foxes, and other predators posed threats, while icy terrain increased the risk of accidents. Peasants relied on tracking skills, traps, and knowledge of local flora to acquire food safely. These excursions required preparation, cooperation, and experience, reinforcing community bonds and family roles. Mental resilience was cultivated through routine, social interaction, and creativity. Storytelling, music, and games offered both instruction and distraction. Tales of clever hunters, heroic ancestors, or cunning solutions to past hardships reinforced practical knowledge while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences created psychological sustenance, helping villagers endure the long, oppressive nights. Social cohesion was essential for survival. Villagers shared labor, assisted in emergencies, and exchanged resources. Mutual dependence was practical, moral, and necessary. Cooperation ensured that no household faced extreme hardship alone, reinforcing the village as a survival unit. Shared rituals, festivals, and communal meals strengthened bonds and provided emotional support. Children learned the rhythm of survival early. Boys practiced hunting, tool repair, and basic carpentry, while girls learned cooking, sewing, and domestic management. Education was entirely practical, emphasizing skills necessary for adulthood. Repetition, observation, and participation ensured that knowledge was retained and passed down, preparing the next generation to endure the same challenges. Health and hygiene remained precarious. Cold, damp, and crowded conditions encouraged illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were essential. Plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was orally transmitted, ensuring that even minor injuries did not become fatal. Mothers, midwives, and local healers were invaluable, maintaining the delicate balance of life through expertise and care. The hearth continued to dominate daily life. Its warmth was essential, and the fire required constant attention. Fuel was carefully rationed and logs stacked efficiently. The hearth was multifunctional, providing light, warmth, and a space for cooking, sewing, and socialization. It was the emotional and practical heart of the household, embodying the survival strategies of the family. Trade and barter, though limited in winter, sustained connections beyond the village. Surplus grains, preserved meat, or wool could be exchanged for tools, spices, or medicine. These interactions strengthened social networks, provided access to scarce resources, and reinforced a broader system of interdependence that enhanced survival prospects. Even leisure had practical value. Storytelling, music, and games reinforced social bonds and provided mental relief. Celebrating minor victories, repairing a roof, trapping game, or successfully preserving food offered psychological reinforcement. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences allowed villagers to endure the monotony and stress of winter. Superstition and ritual were intertwined with daily life. Protective charms, prayers, and ceremonies were observed to prevent illness, protect livestock, and ensure household safety. While their efficacy may be questioned today, they reinforced social cohesion, created structure, and provided psychological comfort. Rituals were integrated into practical survival, aligning with agricultural cycles and seasonal demands. Isolation encouraged self-reliance. Households developed comprehensive systems for survival, managing cooking, heating, tool repair, and caregiving internally. Creativity and adaptability were essential, whether repurposing materials, constructing tools, or improvising solutions. Daily life became a continuous exercise in problem-solving, requiring both skill and ingenuity. Small successes were celebrated and psychologically significant. A well-trapped rabbit, repaired tool, or full stock of preserved food provided pride and motivation. These victories reinforced community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion, sustaining morale in a world dominated by hardship. Weather dictated nearly every aspect of life. Storms, frost, and icy conditions required constant vigilance. Peasants interpreted natural signs, monitored animal behavior, and adjusted routines to mitigate risk. Knowledge of the environment, honed over generations, guided decisions, and enhanced survival. Every observation had practical implications, turning experience into essential wisdom. The rhythm of life in winter cultivated resilience. Labor, foresight, mental discipline, and social cohesion combined to form a robust survival system. Each family, while facing individual challenges, operated within the broader context of the village, relying on cooperation, skill, and ingenuity. Adaptation to the environment became second nature, embedding survival knowledge into both culture and practice. The long nights of winter created a rhythm that shaped every aspect of life. Darkness arrived early, forcing families to adjust their schedules. Daylight hours were dedicated to essential work, chopping firewood, tending animals, fetching water, repairing tools, and preparing meals. Even simple tasks became more challenging in the cold, requiring careful attention and coordination. Efficiency was a necessity, not a choice. The hearth remained the central focus of domestic life. It provided warmth, light, and a space for cooking and social interaction. Fires had to be maintained constantly. Embers were carefully preserved overnight, ensuring that mornings began with heat already established. The hearth also became a place for teaching and storytelling, where children absorbed knowledge about survival, nature, and community traditions. Clothing was another critical element of survival. Layering was essential, with wool, linen, and animal hides providing insulation. Hats, gloves, and hoods protected extremities from frostbite, while boots were maintained to prevent injury. Sewing skills were vital, as clothing was repaired and patched repeatedly. Children learned these skills alongside household chores, gaining expertise in practical maintenance from a young age. Food scarcity shaped daily habits. Families rationed carefully, stretching limited supplies to last through the long winter months. Root vegetables, grains, and preserved meats formed the staple diet, supplemented by foraging and hunting. Stews and porridges were common, simmered for hours to extract maximum nutrition. Meals were planned strategically, balancing immediate consumption with long-term survival. Water collection was a constant challenge. Frozen wells and ice-covered streams required ingenuity to access liquid water. Villagers developed techniques to break ice, insulate containers, and carry water safely to the home. Water collection often became a communal activity, with neighbors assisting each other. Cooperation reduced risk and reinforced social bonds, making survival a shared responsibility. Animals were both lifelines and obligations. Cattle, goats, and sheep provided milk, meat, wool, and warmth. Horses and oxen were essential for hauling firewood, plowing fields, and transporting goods. Livestock had to be fed, sheltered, and monitored constantly. A single loss could endanger the survival of a family, making animal care a daily priority. Children participated in these tasks, learning responsibility and observation. Hunting and foraging required skill and caution. Forests offered sustenance, but also danger. Wolves, foxes, and other predators threatened both humans and livestock. Icy terrain increased the risk of injury. Peasants relied on traps, boughs, and tracking knowledge to acquire food safely. Foraging required understanding of edible plants, roots, and berries, as well as their storage and medicinal uses. Mental resilience was as crucial as physical strength. Long nights, isolation, and monotony could lead to despair. Villagers countered this through structured routines, storytelling, games, and communal activities. Humor and shared experiences provided relief from stress, while tales of ancestors and clever problem-solving reinforced both knowledge and morale. Even small victories offered hope and a sense of accomplishment. Community cohesion was central to survival. Villagers relied on neighbors for assistance with firewood, livestock care, and emergencies. Mutual support reduced individual risk and strengthened the social fabric. Shared rituals, festivals, and meals reinforced communal identity and offered psychological relief during harsh winters. Cooperation was practical, moral, and vital. Education was entirely practical. Boys learned hunting, woodcutting, and tool repair. Girls learned cooking, sewing, and domestic management. Children absorbed knowledge through observation and participation, internalizing lessons essential for adulthood. Skills, discipline, and resilience were taught in tandem, preparing the next generation to endure winter's challenges. Health and hygiene were persistent concerns. Cold, damp conditions and limited water increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were essential. Plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge of these remedies was passed orally, ensuring survival when professional care was unavailable. Mothers, midwives, and healers were critical for maintaining the delicate balance of life. Trade and barter maintained connections and provided access to scarce resources. Surplus grains, preserved foods, or wool could be exchanged for tools, spices, or medicinal herbs. Trade reinforced social networks and enabled families to acquire essential items not available locally. Even limited exchanges had profound survival implications, sustaining both practical needs and community relationships. Clothing, food, firewood, and shelter were constantly monitored. Peasants developed meticulous routines to maintain these essentials. Logs were stacked, straw inspected, food rotated, and bedding arranged to retain warmth. Attention to detail and constant vigilance were necessary to endure winter without serious setbacks. Neglect in any area could have cascading consequences for the household. Leisure had practical value. Storytelling, music, and games reinforced communal bonds, mental resilience, and knowledge transmission. Celebrating minor successes, catching game, repairing tools, or preserving food created pride and motivation. Humor and shared experiences sustained morale and strengthened the collective ability to cope with adversity. Superstition and ritual were integral. Protective charms, prayers, and observances helped prevent misfortune and illness. Rituals reinforced social cohesion, provided structure, and offered psychological comfort. Even if their efficacy was symbolic, these practices maintained morale and continuity during periods of extreme hardship. Isolation encouraged self-reliance. Each household managed cooking, heating, repair, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained, with improvisation necessary for tools, clothing, and shelters. Every challenge required practical problem-solving, embedding survival skills into daily life. Weather dictated nearly every aspect of activity. Storms, frost, and icy conditions required constant adaptation. Observation of natural signs, animal behavior, and seasonal patterns guided decisions. Knowledge of the environment, honed over generations, informed action and enhanced survival. Attentive observation could prevent disaster and maximize efficiency in daily work. The cumulative effect of winter created a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust survival system. Families relied on both individual skill and communal support to endure months of harsh conditions. Adaptation to the environment became instinctive, embedding knowledge, routines, and culture into daily life. Even minor victories were celebrated. Securing food, repairing tools, or maintaining firewood stockpiles provided pride and motivation. These successes reinforced community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by adversity, these achievements were psychological anchors that helped sustain morale and reinforce survival strategies. The biting cold made every task more arduous. Fetching water, tending livestock, chopping firewood, and preparing food were all intensified by frost and snow. Peasants learned to pace themselves, conserving energy while ensuring that essential duties were completed. Efficiency and endurance were not optional. They were the difference between survival and calamity. The hearth remained the epicenter of domestic life. Its warmth was vital, and fires had to be maintained day and night. Families rotated tending duties, ensuring that embers never died out. The hearth also served as a space for socialization and education, where parents taught children practical skills, told stories, and reinforced communal values. It was both a physical and symbolic lifeline. Clothing required constant vigilance. Wool, linen, and animal hides were layered for insulation, patched when worn, and repaired as necessary. Hats, gloves, and boots protected extremities from frostbite. Children learned these skills from an early age, mastering sewing, mending, and improvisation. Proper clothing was essential. Failure to maintain garments could result in serious illness or injury. Food management was a daily challenge. Families rationed supplies carefully, stretching grains, preserved meats, and root vegetables to last for months. Cooking required efficiency and ingenuity. Stews and porridges were designed to maximize nutrition while minimizing waste. Foraging and hunting supplemented household stores, demanding knowledge, skill, and vigilance to avoid danger. Water collection posed continual challenges. Frozen wells, icy streams, and deep snow forced ingenuity. Villagers insulated containers, used heated stones to thaw ice, and traveled cautiously to avoid injury. Community cooperation was common. Multiple families often collected water together, reducing risk and fostering social bonds. Water was essential for both sustenance and hygiene, making its collection a critical activity. Animals were central to survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but required constant care. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs had to be fed, sheltered, and monitored for illness. Horses and oxen were vital for transportation, plowing, and hauling supplies. Neglect could result in disaster, so families devoted significant time and energy to animal husbandry. Children were trained to observe behavior and care for animals, learning skills crucial for future independence. Hunting and foraging required both expertise and caution. Forests offered sustenance but were dangerous. Wolves and foxes threatened both humans and livestock, while icy terrain increased the risk of accidents. Peasants relied on traps, bows, and knowledge of edible plants to secure food safely. Understanding which plants were edible, medicinal, or toxic was essential, passed down orally through generations. Mental endurance was as vital as physical stamina. Long nights, isolation, and monotony challenged morale. Villagers countered this through routine, communal interaction, and creative outlets. Storytelling, songs, and small games offered both instruction and diversion. Humor and shared experiences strengthened social bonds and provided psychological sustenance, essential for surviving prolonged adversity. Community cohesion was critical. Villagers assisted each other with chopping wood, tending livestock, repairing structures, and emergency care. Mutual dependence ensured no household faced extreme hardship alone. Shared meals, rituals, and festivals reinforced social cohesion, offering emotional relief and practical support. Cooperation was necessary for both survival and maintaining community identity. Children's education focused on practical skills. Boys learned hunting, tool repair, and basic carpentry, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and household management. Observation, imitation, and participation were primary learning methods. Knowledge was embedded through hands-on experience, ensuring that the next generation was capable of sustaining household survival in harsh conditions. Health and hygiene were ongoing concerns. Cold, damp, and crowded conditions encouraged disease. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were essential. Chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated common ailments, while knowledge of preventive measures reduced risk. Mothers, midwives, and local healers were indispensable, maintaining care and imparting essential knowledge for survival. Trade and barter, though limited in winter, were vital. Villages exchanged surplus grains, preserved meat and wool for essential tools, medicinal herbs, or spices. Trade reinforced social networks and provided access to resources otherwise unavailable. Even infrequent exchanges had profound survival implications, supporting both practical needs and communal relationships. Clothing, firewood, food, and shelter required constant attention. Families developed meticulous routines to manage these essentials, ensuring warmth, nutrition, and protection. Neglect could have cascading consequences, emphasizing the importance of diligence, foresight, and skill. Survival demanded careful monitoring and adjustment of all household resources. Leisure had practical and psychological value. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and provided mental relief. Celebrating small successes, trapped game, repaired tools, or preserved supplies boosted morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences allowed villagers to endure the monotony and challenges of winter life. Superstition and ritual were deeply integrated. Protective charms, prayers, and observances aimed to prevent illness and misfortune. While their effectiveness may have been symbolic, these practices provided psychological comfort, reinforced social cohesion, and created structure in a world governed by uncertainty. Rituals often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival needs. Isolation fostered self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became second nature as families improvised tools, clothing, and shelters to meet the demands of the environment. Problem-solving was a continuous requirement, embedding resilience and practical intelligence into daily life. Even minor victories carried immense significance. A successful hunt, a repaired roof, or a full stock of food reinforced confidence and morale. These achievements strengthened community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, such victories were psychological anchors, reminding villagers of their agency and resilience. Weather dictated nearly every activity. Storms, frost, and icy terrain forced adaptation. Villagers read natural signs, observed animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge guided decisions, transforming observation into practical wisdom. Awareness of environmental cues could prevent disaster, making attentiveness essential for both survival and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter shaped a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust system of survival. Families depended on both individual skills and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding knowledge, routines, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending a fire to monitoring livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. The relentless cold forced villagers to develop keen observational skills. Even minor changes in the environment, shifts in wind direction, the thickness of ice on a pond, or the behavior of birds and livestock, could signal danger or opportunity. Such observations informed decisions about travel, hunting, foraging, and household management. Over generations, these skills became ingrained, forming a subtle but vital knowledge system that guided daily life. Food scarcity encouraged creativity and resourcefulness. Every morsel was valued, and families learned to stretch limited provisions. Stews, porridges, and soups combined grains, root vegetables, and preserved meat to maximize nutrition. Foraging supplemented household stores, requiring knowledge of edible plants and their storage. Preservation techniques, including salting, smoking, and drying, ensured that food lasted through the longest months. Water remained a critical concern. Frozen wells and icy streams demanded ingenuity to access. Villagers developed methods for insulating containers, breaking ice, and transporting water safely to their homes. Water collection was often a cooperative effort, reducing individual risk and fostering social bonds. Access to water was vital not only for drinking and cooking, but also for hygiene, making it a daily priority. Animals were central to survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but required constant attention. Feeding, sheltering, and monitoring health were daily tasks. Horses and oxen were essential for hauling wood and supplies. Children were trained to observe animal behavior, learning to recognize illness or injury early. The care of animals was not optional. It was critical for the family's survival. Hunting and foraging involved risk and skill. Forests offered sustenance but also dangers, predators, slippery terrain, and harsh weather. Villagers relied on traps, bows, and tracking knowledge to secure food safely. Foraging required precise knowledge of plants, roots, and berries, including which were edible, medicinal, or toxic. These skills were passed down orally and through practice, embedding survival knowledge into everyday life. Mental resilience was cultivated alongside physical endurance. Long nights, isolation, and monotony could sap morale. Villagers countered this through storytelling, music, games, and small rituals. Tales of clever hunters, ancestors, and practical problem-solving reinforced knowledge while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences provided psychological sustenance, helping families endure the winter's long nights. Community support was essential. Villagers helped each other chop wood, tend livestock, repair homes, and manage emergencies. Cooperation ensured that no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and festivals reinforced social cohesion and provided emotional relief, turning necessity into a source of unity. Children's education was entirely practical. Boys learned hunting, woodcutting, and tool repair, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and household management. Learning was hands-on, with observation and participation reinforcing essential skills. Knowledge passed from parent to child ensured that each generation was prepared to face the challenges of winter life. Health and hygiene remained precarious. Cold, damp conditions increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were indispensable. Plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was transmitted orally, ensuring families could provide care without professional assistance. Mothers, midwives, and local healers were essential for survival. The hearth was the heart of the home. It provided warmth, light, and a space for cooking, socialization, and instruction. Fires had to be maintained constantly, with embers preserved overnight. The hearth was both a practical necessity and a symbolic center, reinforcing family cohesion and providing a sense of stability amidst the harsh winter environment. Trade and barter, though limited, connected villages and sustained access to scarce resources. Surplus grains, preserved meat, and wool could be exchanged for tools, spices, or medicinal herbs. Trade strengthened social networks, provided essential goods, and reinforced interdependence between communities, supporting both survival and social cohesion. Clothing, food, firewood, and shelter required constant attention. Families developed meticulous routines to ensure that essential needs were met. Logs were stacked, straw checked, food rotated, and bedding arranged for warmth. Vigilance and foresight were critical. Neglect could have cascading consequences, emphasizing the importance of diligence and planning. Leisure had practical and psychological value. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and provided mental relief. Celebrating minor successes, such as a caught rabbit or repaired roof, strengthened morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences allowed villagers to endure the monotony and challenges of winter life. Superstition and ritual were deeply integrated. Protective charms, prayers, and ceremonies were observed to prevent illness and misfortune. While their efficacy may have been symbolic, these practices provided psychological comfort, reinforced social cohesion, and created structure in a world dominated by uncertainty. Rituals often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival needs. Isolation encouraged self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became second nature as families improvised tools, clothing, and shelters to meet environmental demands. Problem-solving was constant, embedding resilience and practical intelligence into daily life. Even minor victories carried immense significance. Successfully trapping game, repairing a tool, or preserving a stock of food reinforced confidence and morale. These achievements strengthened community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, such victories were psychological anchors that reminded villagers of their agency and resilience. Weather dictated nearly every activity. Storms, frost, and icy terrain forced constant adaptation. Villagers observed natural signs, tracked animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster. Awareness of environmental cues was crucial for survival and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter shaped a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust survival system. Families depended on both individual skill and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding knowledge, routines, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending a fire to monitoring livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. the icy grip of winter shaped the very rhythm of daily life. From dawn to dusk, villagers worked tirelessly to maintain essential resources. Even seemingly simple tasks, chopping wood, fetching water, or tending animals, required extra care and effort under snow and frost. Survival depended on the careful orchestration of time, energy, and skill, leaving little room for waste or distraction. The hearth remained the heart of the home. It provided warmth, light, and a place to cook meals, mend clothing, and socialize. Fires were tended continuously, and embers preserved overnight for an early morning restart. Around this focal point, families gathered, sharing both practical knowledge and stories that transmitted survival skills, cultural values, and communal memory from one generation to the next. Clothing was a matter of life and death. Layers of wool, linen, and animal hides insulated the body, while hats, gloves, and boots protected extremities. Garments were repaired and patched constantly, ensuring they remained functional through weeks of freezing weather. Sewing skills were indispensable, and children learned to mend and improvise garments early, understanding that warmth could not be compromised. Food management was a strategic and daily concern. Families rationed grains, root vegetables, and preserved meats carefully, ensuring supplies lasted through the long winter months. Stews and porridges maximized nutrition while minimizing waste, and foraging supplemented household stores. Every scrap of food was valued, and preservation techniques like drying, salting, and smoking were essential knowledge passed down through generations. Water collection posed unique challenges. Frozen wells, snow-covered streams, and ice-laden rivers required ingenuity to access. Villagers insulated containers, used heated stones to thaw ice, and traveled cautiously to avoid accidents. Water collection was often a cooperative effort, strengthening community bonds while reducing individual risk. Clean water was vital not only for consumption but also for hygiene, making it a daily priority. Animals were vital to survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but demanded constant care. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs needed feeding, sheltering, and monitoring for illness. Horses and oxen were indispensable for hauling wood, plowing, and transporting goods. Children were trained to observe animal behavior closely, learning to detect illness or injury early. Neglecting animals could jeopardize an entire household, making livestock care a top priority. Hunting and foraging were essential, but dangerous. Forests provided sustenance, but posed threats. Predators like wolves, slippery terrain, and harsh weather conditions. Villagers relied on traps, bows, and tracking skills to secure food safely. Knowledge of edible and medicinal plants was critical. Misidentification could be fatal. These lessons were transmitted through practice, observation, and oral instruction, creating a practical knowledge system that ensured survival. Mental endurance was as important as physical stamina. Long nights, isolation, and monotony tested the villagers' resolve. Storytelling, music, and games offered both instruction and distraction, reinforcing practical knowledge while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences became vital coping mechanisms, helping families maintain morale throughout the winter. Community support was indispensable. Villagers helped one another with chopping firewood, tending livestock, repairing homes, and responding to emergencies. Cooperation ensured no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and small celebrations reinforced bonds and offered relief, turning necessity into a source of unity. Children's education was hands-on and practical. Boys learned hunting, tool repair, and woodwork, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and domestic management. Observation, imitation, and participation ensured the transmission of essential skills. By adolescence, children were capable of contributing fully to the household's survival, having internalized the knowledge and routines necessary to endure winter life. Health and hygiene were perpetual concerns. Cold, damp conditions increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies were critical, with plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow treating fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was orally transmitted, allowing households to maintain care even without professional assistance. Mothers, midwives, and healers were essential. their expertise maintaining the delicate balance of life. The hearth was more than a source of warmth. It was the center of culture and education. Fires were tended continuously, providing light for work, sewing, and storytelling. Around the hearth, children learned skills, heard lessons of survival, and absorbed the values of cooperation, diligence, and resilience. It served as both a physical and symbolic anchor, grounding the household amidst the harshness of winter. Trade and barter sustained connections beyond the village. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool were exchanged for tools, spices, or medicine. These interactions reinforced social networks, provided access to scarce resources, and fostered interdependence between communities. Even limited trade had profound effects, supporting both practical needs and social cohesion. Daily vigilance over clothing, firewood, food, and shelter was essential. Families developed meticulous routines to ensure that these basic needs were consistently met. Logs were stacked efficiently, straw was inspected, food was rotated, and bedding arranged for warmth. Neglect could trigger cascading problems, making diligence and foresight critical for survival. Leisure served practical and psychological purposes. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced community bonds, transmitted knowledge, and provided mental relief. Celebrating minor victories, trapped game, repaired tools, or preserved food, strengthened morale. Humor and shared experiences sustained resilience, allowing villagers to endure monotony and adversity. Superstition and ritual were deeply entwined with survival. Protective charms, prayers, and ceremonies aimed to prevent illness and misfortune. While their effectiveness may have been symbolic, these practices provided psychological comfort, reinforced social cohesion, and created structure in a world dominated by uncertainty. Rituals often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival needs. Isolation fostered self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained as families improvised tools, clothing, and shelters to meet environmental demands. Problem-solving was continuous, embedding resilience, intelligence, and resourcefulness into daily life. Even minor achievements carried immense significance. A successfully trapped hare, repaired roof, or full stock of preserved food reinforced confidence and morale. These victories strengthened community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, such successes were psychological anchors, reminding villagers of their agency and resilience. Weather dictated nearly every aspect of existence. Storms, frost, and icy terrain required constant adaptation. Villagers read natural signs, tracked animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster and ensure survival. Awareness of environmental cues was crucial for both efficiency and safety. The cumulative effect of winter shaped a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust system of survival. Families depended on both individual skill and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding knowledge, routines, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending a fire to monitoring livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. The grip of winter influenced every aspect of life, dictating schedules, shaping priorities, and demanding constant attention. Daily routines were meticulously planned around essential survival tasks, leaving little room for leisure or deviation. Even simple chores, chopping wood, fetching water, tending animals, required heightened awareness and effort under snow, ice, and bitter wind. Efficiency was a survival necessity. The hearth remained the centerpiece of domestic life. It provided warmth, light, and a workspace for cooking, sewing, and socialization. Fires had to be tended continuously, with embers preserved overnight to ensure that mornings began with heat already established. Around the hearth, families gathered to share practical knowledge, tell stories, and impart lessons in survival. It was both a physical and symbolic anchor, representing safety and continuity in a harsh environment. Clothing was a critical defense against the cold. Wool, linen, and animal hides were layered for insulation, with hats, gloves, and boots protecting extremities. Garments were repaired and patched constantly to maintain effectiveness. Children learned these skills early, mastering sewing, mending, and improvisation. Proper clothing was not merely comfort, it was essential for survival. Food management dominated daily life. Families rationed grains, preserved meats, and root vegetables carefully to last through the long months. Stews and porridges maximized nutrition while minimizing waste. Foraging and hunting supplemented household stores, requiring skill, caution, and intimate knowledge of the local environment. Preservation techniques like drying, salting, and smoking were passed down through generations, ensuring survival through scarcity. Water collection posed unique challenges. Frozen wells, ice-covered streams, and snow-laden paths required ingenuity to access. Villagers insulated containers, used heated stones to thaw ice, and traveled carefully to prevent accidents. Water collection was often a cooperative effort, reducing risk and reinforcing social bonds. Clean water was vital for drinking, cooking, and hygiene, making it a constant concern. Animals were central to winter survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but demanded constant attention. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs required feeding, shelter, and health monitoring. Horses and oxen were essential for transportation, plowing, and hauling firewood. Children learned to observe animal behavior, detecting illness or injury early. A single neglected animal could jeopardize the survival of the entire household. Hunting and foraging required skill, patience, and caution. Forests offered sustenance, but also dangers. Predators like wolves and foxes, slippery terrain, and harsh weather. Villagers relied on traps, bows, and tracking knowledge to secure food safely. Identifying edible and medicinal plants was crucial, as mistakes could be fatal. These lessons were transmitted through practice, observation, and oral instruction, embedding essential survival knowledge. Mental resilience was as important as physical endurance. Long nights, isolation, and monotony tested the villagers' resolve. Storytelling, music, and games offered distraction and instruction, reinforcing practical knowledge while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences became vital coping mechanisms, sustaining morale throughout the winter months. Community support was indispensable. Villagers assisted each other with chopping wood, tending livestock, repairing structures, and responding to emergencies. Cooperation ensured that no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and small celebrations reinforced social bonds and provided emotional relief, turning necessity into a source of unity. Children's education was practical and immersive. Boys learned hunting, woodcutting, and tool repair, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and household management. Observation, imitation, and participation ensured the knowledge transmission. By adolescence, children were fully capable of contributing to household survival, having internalized both practical skills and the mental discipline required to endure winter life. Health and hygiene were ongoing concerns. Cold, damp conditions increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were essential. Chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was passed orally, allowing families to care for themselves without professional assistance. Mothers, midwives, and local healers were vital, maintaining the delicate balance of life. The hearth was more than warmth. It was a hub of culture and learning. Fires were tended continuously, providing light for work, sewing, and storytelling. Around the hearth, children absorbed lessons in survival, cooperation, and resilience. It was a place where practical skills, cultural values, and communal memory converged, offering stability in a season dominated by hardship. Trade and barter maintained essential connections. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool were exchanged for tools, spices, or medicinal herbs. These exchanges reinforced social networks, provided access to resources, and strengthened interdependence between villages. Even limited trade had profound survival implications, supporting both practical needs and communal cohesion. Clothing, firewood, food, and shelter required constant vigilance. Families developed meticulous routines, inspecting supplies, rotating food, and maintaining warmth. Neglect could have cascading effects, highlighting the importance of diligence and foresight. Survival depended on careful monitoring, planning, and adaptation. Leisure had both practical and psychological value. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and offered mental relief. Celebrating minor successes, such as trapping game, repairing tools, or preserving food, boosted morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences allowed villagers to endure monotony and adversity. Superstition and ritual were integrated into daily life. Protective charms, prayers, and observances aimed to prevent illness and misfortune. While their efficacy may have been symbolic, rituals reinforced social cohesion, created structure, and offered psychological comfort. They often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival needs, linking faith with function. Isolation encouraged self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained as families improvised solutions to meet environmental challenges. Problem-solving was constant, embedding resilience, practical intelligence, and resourcefulness into daily life. Even minor achievements were significant. A trapped rabbit, repaired roof, or full stock of preserved food reinforced confidence and morale. These victories strengthened community identity, individual competence, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, small successes served as psychological anchors, reinforcing the value of effort and planning. Weather dictated nearly every activity. Storms, frost, and icy terrain required constant vigilance. Villagers read natural signs, monitored animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster and ensure survival. Awareness of environmental cues was essential for both safety and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter shaped a culture of endurance. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust survival system. Families relied on both individual skill and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding knowledge, routines, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending the fire to monitoring livestock, contributed to the household's survival. The harshness of winter shaped not only survival strategies but also the rhythms of daily life. Work had to be meticulously planned to coincide with daylight, as limited hours of sun demanded efficiency. Chopping firewood, tending animals, and preparing food became exercises in careful time management. Even minor miscalculations could compromise warmth, nutrition, or safety, making vigilance essential. The hearth remained central to the household. It provided warmth, light, and a space for cooking, sewing, and socialization. Fires required continuous attention, and embers were preserved overnight for early morning use. Around the hearth, families shared stories, imparted knowledge, and reinforced communal values. The hearth was both a practical and symbolic anchor, representing safety, continuity, and domestic stability. Clothing was critical for survival. Layers of wool, linen, and animal hides insulated the body, while hats, gloves, and boots protected extremities from frostbite. Garments were patched, repaired, and repurposed as necessary. Children learned these skills from a young age, understanding that warmth was a matter of life and death. Sewing and mending were everyday skills, and improvisation often became necessary to maintain protection against the cold. Food management dominated daily life. Families rationed grains, root vegetables, and preserved meats to last through the long winter months. Stews and porridges maximized nutrition while minimizing waste. Foraging and hunting supplemented household stores, requiring skill, patience, and intimate knowledge of the environment. Preservation techniques, including drying, salting, and smoking, ensured that food lasted through periods of scarcity and were passed down through generations as essential knowledge. Water collection was a daily challenge. Frozen wells, ice-covered streams, and snow-laden paths demanded ingenuity. Villagers insulated containers, used heated stones to thaw ice, and traveled carefully to avoid accidents. Collecting water was often a cooperative task, fostering social bonds while reducing risk. Clean water was vital not only for consumption but also for hygiene, making it an essential priority in daily routines. Animals were integral to winter survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but required constant attention. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs needed feeding, shelter, and health monitoring. Horses and oxen were indispensable for hauling firewood, plowing, and transporting supplies. Children learned to observe animal behavior, identifying early signs of illness or injury. The care of animals was not optional. It was a critical determinant of the household's survival. Hunting and foraging demanded skill and caution. Forests offered sustenance but were fraught with dangers, predators, treacherous terrain, and harsh weather. Villagers relied on traps, bows, and tracking knowledge to secure food safely. Knowledge of edible and medicinal plants was essential, as mistakes could be fatal. These skills were taught through practice, observation, and oral instruction, ensuring that vital survival knowledge was preserved across generations. Mental resilience was cultivated alongside physical endurance. Long nights, isolation, and monotony tested morale. Villagers countered these challenges with storytelling, music, games, and small rituals. Tales of clever hunters, resourceful ancestors, and practical problem-solving reinforced knowledge and lifted spirits. Humor and shared experiences provided psychological sustenance, essential for enduring extended winter hardships. Community cohesion was indispensable. Villagers assisted one another with chopping wood, tending livestock, repairing homes, and managing emergencies. Cooperation ensured that no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and celebrations strengthened social bonds and offered emotional relief, turning necessity into a source of unity and mutual support. Children's education was deeply practical. Boys learned hunting, woodcutting, and tool repair, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and household management. Observation, imitation, and participation ensured knowledge transmission. By adolescence, children were capable contributors to household survival, having internalized skills, routines, and the mental discipline required to endure winter life. Health and hygiene remained ongoing concerns. Cold, damp conditions increased susceptibility to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were critical. Plants like chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive problems, and wounds. Knowledge was orally transmitted, allowing families to provide care without professional assistance. Mothers, midwives, and local healers were vital, maintaining the delicate balance of life within the household. The hearth was more than warmth. It served as a cultural and educational center. Fires were maintained continuously, providing light for work, sewing, and storytelling. Around the hearth, children absorbed lessons in survival, cooperation, and resilience. It was a place where practical skills, communal knowledge, and cultural values converged, offering stability and continuity amidst environmental challenges. Trade and barter were essential for survival. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool were exchanged for tools, spices, or medicinal herbs. These exchanges reinforced social networks, provided access to scarce resources, and strengthened interdependence between villages. Even limited trade had profound implications for both practical survival and community cohesion. Daily vigilance over clothing, firewood, food, and shelter was essential. Families developed meticulous routines, inspecting supplies, rotating food, and maintaining warmth. Neglect could trigger cascading problems, highlighting the importance of diligence, foresight, and careful planning. Survival depended on constant attention and adaptation to changing conditions. Leisure had both practical and psychological benefits. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and offered relief from monotony. Celebrating minor successes, trapped game, repaired tools, or preserved supplies boosted morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences enabled villagers to endure long winters and maintain resilience. Superstition and ritual were deeply integrated into daily life. Protective charms, prayers, and observances aimed to prevent illness and misfortune. While their efficacy may have been symbolic, these practices offered psychological comfort, reinforced social cohesion, and created structure in an unpredictable world. Rituals often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival needs, blending belief with function. Isolation fostered self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained as families improvised solutions for tools, clothing, and shelter. Problem-solving was continuous, embedding resilience, intelligence, and resourcefulness into daily life. Even minor victories were deeply significant. Successfully trapping a rabbit, repairing a roof, or preserving a stock of food reinforced confidence, morale, and community identity. These small achievements reminded villagers of their agency and capacity to endure, serving as psychological anchors during the harshest periods of winter. Weather dictated nearly every action. Storms, frost, and icy terrain required constant adaptation. Villagers read natural signs, monitored animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster. Awareness of environmental cues was critical for both safety and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter shaped a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation formed a robust survival system. Families depended on both individual skill and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding routines, knowledge, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending the fire to monitoring livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. Winter's dominance over daily life demanded vigilance and precision. Every activity, from tending animals to maintaining firewood, was influenced by temperature, snow, and ice. Peasants learned to anticipate weather patterns, recognizing subtle cues in the environment. Wind direction, cloud formations, animal behavior, and frost patterns all provided vital information that guided decisions. Knowledge of these signs was practical, cultivated over generations, and essential for survival. The hearth was the physical and emotional heart of the home. Its warmth provided comfort, while its light enabled work, instruction, and storytelling. Fires were tended carefully, with embers preserved overnight to ensure continuity. Around the hearth, families transmitted knowledge about survival, ethics, and communal values. It was both a sanctuary and a center of domestic culture, a place where daily routines intersected with education and tradition. Clothing was essential protection against the cold. Layers of wool, linen, and animal hides insulated the body, while hats, gloves, and boots safeguarded extremities. Garments were repaired continuously, patched, and sometimes repurposed. Children learned these skills early, understanding that survival depended on warmth and protection. Sewing and mending were everyday necessities, while improvisation became crucial in times of scarcity. Food management required meticulous planning. Families rationed grains, preserved meats, and root vegetables, ensuring supplies lasted through the long months of winter. Stews and porridges were designed to maximize nutrition while minimizing waste. Foraging and hunting supplemented household stores, demanding skill, patience, and careful observation of the natural environment. Preservation techniques, including salting, smoking, and drying, ensured long-term survival and were passed down through generations. Water collection was a daily priority and constant challenge. Frozen wells, ice-covered streams, and snow-laden paths demanded creativity to access. Villagers insulated containers, thawed ice with heated stones, and traveled cautiously to avoid accidents. Water collection was often a communal activity, fostering social bonds while reducing individual risk. Access to clean water was vital for both consumption and hygiene, making it an indispensable task. Animals were central to winter life. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but required continuous care. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs needed feeding, shelter, and health monitoring. Horses and oxen were essential for hauling wood, plowing, and transporting goods. Children were trained to observe animal behavior, recognizing early signs of illness or injury. A single neglect could jeopardize the household's survival, making animal care a priority that demanded skill and attention. Hunting and foraging required both expertise and caution. Forests offered sustenance, but also danger. Wolves, foxes, and other predators threatened both humans and livestock. Slippery terrain and harsh weather increased the risk of accidents. Villagers relied on traps, boughs, and tracking skills to gather food safely. Identifying edible and medicinal plants was essential, as mistakes could be fatal. These skills were taught through observation, oral instruction, and hands-on practice, ensuring continuity of practical knowledge. Mental resilience was cultivated alongside physical labor. Long nights, isolation, and monotony tested endurance and morale. Storytelling, music, games, and rituals provided relief and instruction. Tales of clever ancestors, resourceful hunters, and practical problem-solving reinforced skills while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences became critical coping mechanisms, sustaining families during periods of hardship. Community cohesion was vital. Villagers assisted one another with chopping wood, tending animals, repairing shelters, and handling emergencies. Cooperation ensured no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and celebrations strengthened bonds and offered psychological relief. Social unity was both a practical necessity and a moral imperative, transforming hardship into a shared experience. Children's education focused on practical survival skills. Boys learned hunting, woodwork, and tool repair, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and domestic management. Observation, imitation, and participation were primary learning methods. By adolescence, children contributed significantly to household survival, having internalized routines, practical skills, and mental discipline necessary for enduring harsh winters. Health and hygiene were ongoing concerns. Cold, damp conditions increased vulnerability to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were essential. Chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was orally transmitted, allowing households to provide care independently. Mothers, midwives, and local healers played crucial roles, maintaining health and balancing domestic needs in challenging conditions. The hearth was more than warmth. It was a center of culture and education. Fires were maintained continuously, providing light for work, sewing, and storytelling. Around the hearth, children absorbed lessons in practical skills, cooperation, and resilience. It was a space where survival knowledge, communal values, and cultural continuity converged, anchoring the household during long, harsh winters. Trade and barter connected villages and sustained survival. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool were exchanged for tools, spices, and medicinal herbs. These exchanges strengthened social networks and reinforced interdependence. Even limited trade had profound consequences, supporting both practical survival and communal cohesion. Daily vigilance over clothing, firewood, food, and shelter was essential. Families developed routines to maintain these essentials, rotating food, inspecting supplies, and ensuring warmth. Neglect could trigger cascading failures, highlighting the necessity of diligence, foresight, and careful management. Survival depended on constant attention and adaptability. Leisure had practical and psychological importance. Storytelling, music, and games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and offered relief from monotony. Celebrating minor successes, trapped game, repaired tools, or preserved food boosted morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences helped families endure prolonged periods of hardship. Superstition and ritual were integral. Protective charms, prayers, and observances sought to prevent illness and misfortune. Their efficacy may have been symbolic, but rituals reinforced social cohesion, created structure, and provided psychological comfort. Often aligned with seasonal cycles, these practices merged belief with practical survival strategies. Isolation fostered self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained as families improvised tools, clothing, and shelters to meet environmental challenges. Problem-solving was continuous, embedding resilience, intelligence, and resourcefulness into daily life. Even minor achievements held great significance. Trapped game, repaired roofs, or full stores of preserved food reinforced confidence, morale, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, such victories served as psychological anchors, reminding villagers of their agency and resilience. Weather dictated nearly every activity. Storms, frost, and icy terrain required constant adaptation. Villagers observed natural signs, monitored animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster. Awareness of environmental cues was crucial for survival and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter forged a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation created a robust survival system. Families relied on both individual skill and collective support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding routines, knowledge, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending fires to observing livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. Winter's relentless grip dictated the structure of daily life. From the moment the sun rose until it disappeared behind snow-laden hills, every activity was shaped by necessity. Chopping firewood, tending animals, fetching water, and preparing food required careful planning and constant attention. Misjudging weather conditions or mismanaging resources could have immediate consequences, making vigilance an essential part of life. The hearth remained the center of household activity. Its warmth provided comfort, its light enabled work, and its presence offered a sense of security. Fires were tended continuously, with embers preserved overnight to ensure mornings began with heat already established. Around the hearth, families shared stories, passed down knowledge, and reinforced values essential to survival. It was both a practical and symbolic anchor in the harsh winter months. Clothing was a matter of life and death. Layers of wool, linen, and animal hides insulated the body, while hats, gloves, and boots protected extremities from frostbite. Garments were continuously repaired, patched, and sometimes repurposed. Children learned these skills early, internalizing the importance of warmth and protection. Sewing and improvisation were essential, as inadequate clothing could lead to illness or even death. Food management was a daily preoccupation. Families rationed grains, preserved meats, and root vegetables, stretching supplies to last through long months. Stews and porridges combined ingredients to maximize nutrition while minimizing waste. Foraging and hunting supplemented household stores, requiring skill, patience, and a deep understanding of the environment. Preservation techniques, salting, smoking, and drying, ensured food lasted and were passed down through generations as essential knowledge. Water collection posed significant challenges. Frozen wells, ice-covered streams, and snow-laden paths demanded creativity and caution. Villagers insulated containers, used heated stones to thaw ice, and traveled carefully to avoid accidents. Water collection was often a communal effort, reinforcing social bonds and reducing individual risk. Access to clean water was vital for both drinking and hygiene, making it an indispensable daily task. Animals were central to survival. Livestock provided food, labor, and warmth, but required constant care. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs needed feeding, shelter, and health monitoring. Horses and oxen were essential for hauling firewood, plowing fields, and transporting goods. Children were trained to observe animal behavior, identifying illness or injury early. A single neglected animal could jeopardize an entire household, emphasizing the critical role of livestock care. Hunting and foraging demanded skill and vigilance. Forests offered sustenance but posed dangers. Predators, slippery terrain, and unpredictable weather. Villagers relied on traps, bows, and tracking skills to secure food safely. Identifying edible and medicinal plants was crucial, as errors could be fatal. These skills were passed down through observation, practice, and oral instruction, embedding essential survival knowledge in the fabric of daily life. Mental resilience was as vital as physical stamina. Long nights, isolation, and monotony tested endurance and morale. Villagers turned to storytelling, music, games, and rituals for relief and instruction. Tales of clever ancestors, resourceful hunters, and practical problem-solving reinforced survival skills while uplifting spirits. Humor and shared experiences were indispensable coping mechanisms, sustaining families through prolonged winter hardships. Community cohesion was essential. Villagers assisted one another with firewood, livestock, home repairs, and emergencies. Cooperation ensured that no household faced extreme hardship alone. Communal meals, shared rituals, and small celebrations strengthened social bonds and provided psychological relief, transforming necessity into a source of unity and mutual support. Children's education focused on practical skills. Boys learned hunting, woodwork, and tool repair, while girls mastered cooking, sewing, and household management. Observation, imitation, and participation ensured knowledge transmission. By adolescence, children contributed significantly to household survival, having internalized both skills and the discipline necessary to endure winter life. Health and hygiene were constant concerns. Cold, damp conditions increased vulnerability to illness. Herbal remedies and traditional medicine were critical. Chamomile, sage, and yarrow treated fevers, digestive issues, and wounds. Knowledge was orally transmitted, allowing families to care for themselves without professional assistance. Mothers, midwives, and local healers played crucial roles, maintaining the household's health in challenging conditions. The hearth was more than a source of warmth. It was a hub of education and culture. Fires provided light for work, sewing, and storytelling. Around the hearth, children absorbed lessons in survival, cooperation, and resilience. It was a space where practical skills, communal knowledge, and cultural values converged, offering stability and continuity during harsh winters. Trade and barter maintained essential connections. Surplus grains, preserved meats, and wool were exchanged for tools, spices, and medicinal herbs. These exchanges strengthened social networks and reinforced interdependence. Even limited trade had profound implications for survival and community cohesion, providing resources that were otherwise unavailable locally. Daily vigilance over clothing, firewood, food, and shelter was critical. Families developed routines to maintain these essentials, rotating food, inspecting supplies, and ensuring warmth. Neglect could trigger cascading failures, underscoring the importance of diligence, foresight, and careful management. Survival depended on constant attention and adaptability. Leisure had practical and psychological significance. Storytelling, music, and communal games reinforced social bonds, transmitted knowledge, and offered relief from monotony. Celebrating minor successes, trapped game, repaired tools, or preserved food, boosted morale. Humor, creativity, and shared experiences helped families endure extended periods of hardship. Superstition and ritual were deeply intertwined with daily life. Protective charms, prayers, and observances aimed to prevent illness and misfortune. Their efficacy may have been symbolic, but these practices reinforced social cohesion, provided psychological comfort, and created structure in a world dominated by uncertainty. Rituals often aligned with seasonal cycles and practical survival strategies, blending faith with functionality. Isolation fostered self-reliance. Households managed cooking, heating, repairs, and caregiving independently. Creativity and adaptability became ingrained as families improvised tools, clothing, and shelters to meet environmental challenges. Problem-solving was constant, embedding resilience, intelligence, and resourcefulness into daily life. Even minor achievements were highly significant. Successfully trapping game, repairing a roof, or storing sufficient food reinforced confidence, morale, and family cohesion. In a world dominated by hardship, such victories served as psychological anchors, reminding villagers of their agency and resilience. Weather dictated nearly every activity. Storms, frost, and icy terrain required constant adaptation. Villagers observed natural signs, monitored animal behavior, and adjusted routines accordingly. Generational knowledge transformed observation into practical wisdom, guiding decisions that could prevent disaster. Awareness of environmental cues was crucial for survival and efficiency. The cumulative effect of winter forged a culture of resilience. Physical labor, resourcefulness, mental discipline, and community cooperation created a robust survival system. Families relied on both individual skill and communal support. Adaptation became instinctive, embedding routines, knowledge, and values into daily life. Every action, from tending fires to observing livestock, contributed to the household's endurance. Winter tested the limits of both human and animal endurance. Each day was a negotiation between necessity and survival, with every action carefully weighed against available energy and resources. Peasants lived with an acute awareness of scarcity, understanding that one miscalculation could endanger not only themselves, but their entire household. This awareness bred caution, patience, and a culture of attentiveness that defined their way of life. The hearth remained the central axis around which domestic routines revolved. It was the source of heat, light, and food preparation, but it was also a gathering point for teaching and storytelling. Children sat by the fire, watching elders cook, mend clothing, or carve tools, learning by silent observation. At night, flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as families recited old tales, preserving memory and transmitting cultural values alongside practical wisdom. Clothing was not just a matter of warmth, but of dignity and identity. A family's ability to provide proper garments for winter signaled its preparedness. Wool was prized for insulation, linen served as underlayers, and fur was used sparingly for extreme cold. Clothes were repaired constantly, often with visible stitching that told stories of persistence and care. Scarcity meant garments were handed down from parent to child, repurposed until the fabric was no longer usable. Food management remained a constant source of anxiety. Each meal had to be considered in light of the weeks ahead. Root cellars, smokehouses, and storage jars were checked daily to ensure no spoilage or infestation occurred. Stews simmered slowly over the hearth, stretching small amounts of meat by combining them with grains, beans, and herbs. Foraged plants and dried berries added flavor and essential vitamins. Every scrap was valued, and waste was considered unthinkable. Water access was a trial of endurance. Frozen wells had to be broken open with iron tools, while streams were approached cautiously as their icy surfaces could collapse without warning. Some families melted snow, though it required large amounts to yield sufficient drinking water. Carrying water was laborious, with heavy buckets balanced on wooden yokes across shoulders. The daily struggle for water-bound families together in shared effort, reminding them of nature's dominance over their lives. Animals were both dependents and protectors. Cows provided milk, sheep offered wool, and goats gave hardy sustenance, but these creatures required food, warmth, and shelter. Peasants shared their homes with smaller livestock, such as chickens or pigs, whose body heat added to the warmth inside cramped huts. Horses and oxen remained outdoors in barns, where straw bedding and layered roofing insulated against frost. The well-being of animals was tied directly to the survival of the family. Hunting and foraging continued despite the risks. Traps were set in forested areas, often checked at dawn before predators arrived. Hunters followed faint tracks in snow, recognizing subtle signs of movement invisible to the untrained eye. Foraging demanded an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, as even in winter, some roots, nuts, and berries remained accessible. Mistakes could be fatal, so these skills were passed carefully from elders to youth, tested through repetition and experience. Mental resilience was exercised daily. Winter's monotony was heavy, but peasants sought solace in storytelling, prayer, and small creative acts. A well-told tale could lift spirits, a song could bind voices together in warmth, and humor could ease fear. Families relied on rituals to create rhythm and meaning in their days, using routine as a defense against despair. Even silence around the fire carried weight, offering shared comfort in the face of hardship. Community bonds provided strength beyond the household. Villagers shared resources when possible, exchanged labor, and gathered for festivals despite the cold. These gatherings were more than leisure. They reinforced solidarity and reminded individuals that they were part of something larger. Celebrations often coincided with religious observances, linking survival with spiritual meaning and embedding the struggle of winter into a broader narrative of endurance and faith. Children grew up quickly in such an environment. By necessity, they were entrusted with meaningful tasks early, feeding chickens, gathering wood chips, or carrying small buckets of water. These responsibilities were framed not as chores, but as contributions to survival, teaching children that their labor had immediate value elders guided them with patience, knowing that the skills learned in youth could one day mean the difference between life and death. Health remained precarious, with minor illnesses posing major risks. Coughs, fevers, or wounds could escalate quickly in the cold. Herbal remedies and poultices were prepared using dried plants stored from warmer seasons. Mothers often relied on wisdom passed down through generations, blending knowledge of plants with rituals meant to invoke divine protection. Midwives, though often unschooled in formal medicine, were repositories of healing knowledge, providing care rooted in experience and tradition. The hearth, glowing at the center of the home, was more than survival. It was identity. Families measured their strength by the steadiness of their fire. To let the hearth go cold was both dangerous and symbolic of failure. Children were taught never to waste embers, and adults carried glowing coals carefully when visiting neighbors, ensuring no household ever lacked the spark of life. Fire was survival, but it was also sacred. Trade and barter remained lifelines for isolated villages. Even in winter, small exchanges occurred when conditions allowed. A sack of grain might be traded for a bundle of herbs, a skein of wool for a sharpened tool. Trust underpinned these exchanges, as dishonesty could mean disaster for both parties. The flow of goods tied villages together, creating fragile webs of interdependence that strengthened communities against winter's isolation. Daily vigilance defined peasant life. Food stores were checked for vermin, firewood supplies replenished, and clothing repaired. Routines were repetitive but essential, and their discipline prevented catastrophe. These cycles taught patience and foresight, embedding habits that were passed from one generation to the next as unquestioned truths of survival. Leisure was humble but profound. Songs carried across small huts, games of dice or carved boards offered distraction, and riddles challenged children's wit. Storytelling held special power, transporting listeners beyond their hardships into worlds of myth, memory, and moral instruction. Entertainment was inseparable from education, ensuring that every moment of joy also reinforced resilience and knowledge. Superstition wove through daily survival. A charm hung above a doorway, a whispered prayer before a journey, or a ritual blessing over food helped ward off invisible threats. Faith mingled with practicality, offering comfort in situations where control was limited. Belief did not replace labor, but complemented it, adding a layer of psychological protection against the uncertainty of winter life. Isolation demanded self-sufficiency. Families learned to repair their own tools, mend their own garments, and improvise when materials ran short. Ingenuity was celebrated, and children grew up admiring those who could craft solutions from scarcity. Creativity became survival, turning limitations into opportunities for innovation. Minor achievements carried disproportionate weight. The successful storage of food, the repair of a cracked roof beam, or the trapping of a single hair provided not just practical benefit, but emotional encouragement. Each small victory was celebrated, reaffirming faith in survival and reinforcing community morale. The weather's power was inescapable. Storms could isolate villages for weeks, while sudden thaws created treacherous ice and flooding. Observing natural signs, bird migrations, frost thickness, or the scent of the air was essential for anticipating change. Knowledge was preserved not in books, but in memories, stories, and habits, ensuring each generation inherited the wisdom of survival. The culture of winter forged identities rooted in resilience. Labor, observation, patience, and cooperation formed the framework of survival. Families depended on one another, communities supported each household, and generations passed down habits that became second nature. The struggle was constant, but within it lay meaning. Survival itself was a triumph, proof of strength, endurance, and unity. Winter shaped not only routines, but the very rhythm of thought. Each choice, from the smallest act of mending a garment to the larger task of storing grain, was weighed against the long stretch of cold that still lay ahead. Survival was not an event, but a process, a constant negotiation between human will and the merciless demands of nature. The hearth remained the beating heart of this process. Its flames provided warmth, its smoke carried into the rafters, and its glow drew the family together in moments of both labor and reflection. It was the first task of the morning and the last duty at night, tended with reverence equal to any ritual. Around it, conversations unfolded about the weather, the animals, the work yet to be done. In its light, elders spoke lessons that children remembered long after the embers dimmed. Clothing continued to act as armor against the cold. Wool cloaks layered over simple tunics, animal hides turned into stiff boots, and linen wrappings served as makeshift insulation. The garments themselves bore marks of survival, stitches from repeated repair, patches in contrasting colors, and signs of wear that told stories of winters endured. To outsiders, they may have appeared ragged, but within the community they represented endurance, proof of diligence and care. Food was never far from anyone's thoughts. Even as meals were eaten, minds turned toward what remained in storage and how best to stretch it further. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots were treasured, not for their flavor, but for their longevity. Beans, peas, and oats formed the backbone of nutrition, filling stews that simmered slowly on the fire. Meat was used sparingly, often more for its broth than its substance. Nothing was wasted, not bones, not skins, not even fat, which could be rendered for light or cooking. Water demanded labor each day. A trip to the stream could mean breaking through thick ice, hauling heavy buckets, and carefully navigating frozen paths. Melting snow became common, though it was inefficient and labor-intensive. To conserve effort, water was rationed almost as carefully as food, and families developed rhythms of use that maximized every drop. Washing was rare, but drinking and cooking were prioritized without question. Animals were the hidden foundation of survival. Sheep provided wool, cows gave milk when possible, and chickens offered precious eggs. Feeding them through the winter required foresight, as hay and fodder had to be harvested months in advance. Families often sacrificed part of their own supplies to ensure animals lived. Understanding their value extended far beyond one season. Children bonded with these creatures, learning responsibility and compassion alongside necessity. Hunting and foraging remained unpredictable but essential. Rabbits, birds, and the occasional deer could mean the difference between hunger and relief. Traps required constant maintenance, and knowledge of the land determined success. Foraging was limited in the deep winter, yet certain hardy plants or nuts could still be found by those who knew where to look. The act itself carried risk. Venturing too far meant exposure to cold, predators, or disorientation in the snow. Mental endurance defined the household's strength. The monotony of long nights threatened morale, but families countered with rhythm and ritual. Songs were sung in quiet tones, stories retold until they became part of memory, and games improvised to spark laughter. Even silence had its place. Shared moments of stillness by the fire, where the crackle of wood seemed a reminder that life endured in small, steady ways. Community life extended beyond individual huts. Neighbors helped one another with burdens too heavy for a single family, hauling timber, repairing roofs, or assisting in childbirth. These acts of cooperation were not favors but obligations, understood as part of the social fabric. Festivities, though modest, were held to break the monotony. A shared meal, a simple dance, or collective prayer reaffirmed bonds and reminded all that no one faced winter entirely alone. Children absorbed these lessons without formal schooling. They learned by watching, imitating, and participating. A boy might accompany his father to chop wood, carrying smaller branches while observing how larger logs were split. A girl might sit beside her mother, threading a needle through coarse wool until her stitches grew steady. Each task carried immediate utility, ensuring that learning was inseparable from survival itself. Health was fragile, balanced on the edge of scarcity. Illness spread quickly in cramped, smoky huts, and remedies were as much ritual as they were medicine. Dried herbs steeped into teas, poultices applied to wounds, and whispered prayers over the sick blurred the line between science and faith. Small comforts, a warm drink, a hand held during fever, were as vital as any treatment. Elders bore the heaviest toll, their wisdom valued even as their strength faded. The hearth, again and again, emerged as the symbol of continuity. Its fire was a metaphor for the family's own endurance, tended carefully, never allowed to extinguish, always demanding attention, yet offering sustenance in return. When neighbors shared embers with one another, it was more than practicality. It was a gesture of solidarity, a promise that no home would fall into darkness if others could prevent it. Trade and barter, though reduced in winter, did not disappear. Travelers braved the cold to bring salt, iron tools, or preserved fish, goods that could not be produced locally. In return, peasants offered wool, hides, or surplus grains. Trust was the unspoken currency of these exchanges, for dishonesty in such conditions could doom lives. The smallest exchange was therefore both practical and moral, weaving a network of mutual reliance that stretched across villages. Daily vigilance formed the backbone of existence. A door left unlatched could mean cold drafts. Firewood left outside could freeze solid. A forgotten food jar could invite vermin. Each mistake, however small, carried weight. Yet within this vigilance lay a strange rhythm, a sense of security in routine. Families grew accustomed to their cycles, and through repetition, they created order out of uncertainty. Leisure, modest though it was, nourished the spirit. A carved whistle, a painted board for games, or the rhythmic beat of hands against a drum transformed long nights into something bearable. Storytelling, however, held pride of place. Myths of heroes, tales of clever peasants, and stories of long-ago winters blended entertainment with instruction, embedding values of resilience and wit into the minds of the young. Superstitions wrapped daily survival in unseen protections. A sprig of dried herbs might hang above a doorway, believed to ward off illness. Travelers carried tokens against misfortune, and prayers were whispered before dangerous journeys. These practices were not separate from survival, but entwined with it, giving shape and meaning to hardships that might otherwise feel arbitrary. Isolation bred ingenuity. Families became adept at improvising solutions, reshaping broken tools, stitching garments from scraps, or crafting toys from leftover wood. Scarcity was not simply endured, but transformed into an opportunity for creativity, a way to assert control over an unforgiving world. Children admired those who could solve problems with limited means, seeing in them examples of wisdom worth emulating. Small victories, again, loomed large. The successful preservation of food, the repair of a leaking roof, or the capture of a hare became reasons for quiet celebration. These triumphs were shared, reminding all that survival was built from countless small acts rather than dramatic gestures. Gratitude for these moments became its own form of sustenance. Weather, ever present, demanded constant observation. The thickness of morning frost, the flight of birds, or the heaviness of the air were read as signs of storms or thaws. This knowledge was not written but lived, passed from one mouth to another, reinforced by repetition until it became instinct. For peasants, weather was not background. It was an active force, a companion and adversary shaping every decision. The culture that emerged from these struggles was one of endurance, cooperation, and adaptation. Families found meaning not in conquering nature, but in coexisting with it, learning its patterns and shaping their lives accordingly. Winter was not simply endured but embraced as a season of testing, a time when resilience, community, and tradition proved their worth. Winter's persistence left its mark not only on the body but also on the mind. Days shortened to the point where night seemed to dominate, and with the lack of sunlight came a quiet heaviness. People accepted it not as something to be cured, but as something to be lived through. They found balance in routine, anchoring themselves in the repetition of chores and the comfort of familiarity. Predictability became a shield against despair. The cycles of labor and rest carried a rhythm that provided stability. Morning meant tending animals, breaking ice for water, and stoking the fire. Midday was for meals, mending, and preparation for the colder night ahead. Evening brought a return to the hearth, where tools were repaired, yarn was spun, and quiet songs filled the silence. Nothing was left to chance, because in winter, chance often carried risk. Food supplies were revisited daily, counted and inspected with care. Mold, rot, or vermin could undo months of work in a single moment. A family's survival depended on vigilance. Grain bins were checked for moisture, root cellars were examined for frost, and dried herbs were carefully portioned. Families taught children early that waste was not only careless, but dangerous, a lesson repeated in both words and lived practice. Clothing was repaired endlessly. Woolen socks gained new soles, cloaks acquired new stitching, and mittens grew patchwork patterns of survival. The art of mending was passed down as carefully as any tradition, for new cloth was rare, and every garment represented labor already invested. A well-mended piece of clothing was a quiet triumph, proof that a household endured against both wear and weather. The hearth, always central, carried meanings beyond warmth. Its fire represented life itself, tended constantly to ensure it never faded. Each spark reminded families of the balance between fragility and persistence. Ashes from the previous day carried into the new morning, symbolizing continuity. Around its glow, disputes softened, laughter grew, and memories were created. In its light, winter seemed less threatening, its weight shared and diminished. Children found joy even in scarcity. They carved toys from wood scraps, used bones as makeshift dice, and invented games requiring nothing more than imagination. Their laughter echoed against wooden walls, breaking the silence of long nights. These small sparks of playfulness reminded parents that endurance was not only about survival, but about nurturing life in all its forms, even the joyous. Neighbors remained essential. Winter's challenges bound people closer, not further apart. A family running low on food might borrow grain, promising repayment come spring. A man who injured himself chopping wood could rely on others to provide help until he recovered. Such acts were not considered charity, but necessity, ensuring that the web of survival remained strong for all. A single family failing could ripple outward, threatening the stability of the community as a whole. Illness posed the most unpredictable danger. Coughs that began small could deepen into something fatal, especially among the young and old. Without physicians, peasants relied on memory, tradition, and herbs preserved from summer. Honey soothed throats, garlic was believed to fight infection, and warm broths kept strength from fading. Faith filled the gaps, with prayers whispered into the smoke of the fire, as if carried upward to something greater. Time itself felt altered. With darkness stretching longer, nights seemed endless, and days passed almost unnoticed. Seasons became the true measure of time, marked not by calendars but by natural signs. The lengthening of daylight, the sound of birds, or the first drip of melted snow. Children grew accustomed to this rhythm, understanding the passage of time as a cycle, not a line. Superstition filled the spaces where knowledge ended. A sudden storm might be seen as a sign of displeasure from unseen forces, while an unexpected thaw carried omens of both hope and risk. Charms were hung near doors, animals were blessed before slaughter, and travelers carried tokens believed to protect them. These practices may not have altered reality, but they offered comfort, a sense of control in a world ruled by uncertainty. The soundscape of winter was distinct. Outside, wind howled across frozen fields, creaking branches groaned under snow, and distant wolves howled through the night. Inside, life produced its own music, the crackle of firewood, the bubbling of stew, the steady scrape of tools. Silence often filled the gaps, a silence so deep it reminded all who listened of the vastness that surrounded their small, fragile huts. Despite hardship, moments of beauty existed. Icicles glimmered like crystal, frost-painted windows with intricate designs, and the moon reflected across snow in a light so sharp it seemed brighter than day. These glimpses of wonder did not erase the struggle, but softened it, offering a reminder that even in difficulty, nature could still inspire awe. Faith remained central to endurance. Churches, though cold and drafty, filled with worshippers seeking strength. Candles flickered in the dim spaces, prayers rose in murmured unison, and hymns echoed with solemnity. For many, survival was not just physical, but spiritual. Faith provided the hope that suffering was not meaningless, that endurance was part of a larger story that stretched beyond the season. Barter networks endured through the cold. Salt, wool, and small tools remained valuable. Coins had little meaning compared to items that could sustain life directly. Trust guided these exchanges. Dishonesty in winter was nearly unthinkable, for it endangered not only individuals, but the entire fabric of survival. Generosity, too, appeared in small gestures. A handful of dried berries shared, or a piece of bread given freely. The wisdom of elders carried weight. Their stories told of harsher winters survived, of mistakes made and lessons learned. They recalled years when food ran out early, when disease spread unchecked, and when communities nearly collapsed. These warnings were not told to frighten, but to instruct, ensuring the younger generation carried both knowledge and caution. Each retelling anchored the present in a continuum of experience. Dreams offered escape. In sleep, peasants imagined spring, green fields, and the warmth of sun on skin. They dreamed of abundance, of laughter, of freedom from the constant demands of survival. These visions carried strength into waking hours, serving as reminders that winter, however endless it seemed, was only a season destined to yield. And so, life continued, steady, repetitive, and quietly heroic. Every log split, every stitch sewn, every meal stretched was an act of defiance against winter's weight. Families knew no triumph greater than waking each morning to find fire still burning, food still present, and loved ones still alive. Survival was not grand but humble, a collection of countless small victories that, together, formed the miracle of endurance.